Ethan Kalekmanis is back at quarterback for Rutgers. And honestly, I think the Scarlet Knights have built a pretty solid team through the transfer portal. Um, Greg Schiano is doing a really good job as the head coach rebuilding this program. I think things are trending up for Rutgers, but the Big Ten really didn't do them any favors with their Big Ten schedule. So making a bowl game is going to be an uphill battle, despite Rutgers probably being a better team than last year. It starts off with a relatively difficult game in the non-conference as well against Ohio, one of the better schools in the MAC. Ohio is returning Navarro at the starting quarterback position, and all around going to be a very solid team still. I think Rutgers is significantly better, but this isn't one of the easier group of five games that you could have, which is why it's not at 100%. But regardless, we do believe that at home, Rutgers is going to be able to pull out this victory.
And that is really due to the fact that Ohio is losing a good amount of their defense, along with their leading wide receiver from last year. But Parker Navarro returning does bring some upside for the Bobcats. The following week is against Miami of Ohio, who was the second best team in the MAC last year behind Ohio. And they have a lot more transfers coming in. A lot of the team is gone from last year, and that's why the percentage is a little bit higher. But Miami is still one of the better programs in the group of five as well, but similarly to Ohio, it is a road trip for the Red Hawks against a Rutgers team that, like Jonas said, is going to be pretty solid. So Rutgers should move to 2-0 here, and then they'll get to 3-0 with a win over Norfolk State before starting Big Ten play.
And it starts off with a home matchup against Iowa, bringing in South Dakota State transfer
Mark Gronowski.
Mark Gronowski at the starting quarterback position. And the defense, once again, going to be very solid for Iowa. A lot of people seem to think that the offense is going to be improved now with Gronowski. It's going to be tough for him to adapt to FBS play, I think, at the start. And also, just Iowa doesn't ever have a really good offense. There's normally a lot of hype around it. Like, oh, they brought in a couple transfers, or they have a five-star quarterback, or something. But it never ends up panning out. So I think what we can count on from Iowa is having a really good defense, and I think they're going to make it very tough for Rutgers to move the football. And in typical Iowa fashion, I think they're going to win a low-scoring game here to start off Big Ten play for the Scarlet Knights.
And that game could end up going either way just because there is a lot of youth on this Rutgers team. And like Jonah mentioned earlier on, too, that the transfer portal was one of the big reasons why Rutgers could possibly be a sneaky good team. The entire defensive line is made up of transfers, but some really good transfers, particularly Eric O'Neill coming in from James Madison, who's coming off a 13 sack season. And the secondary is also having some new guys come in as well. Cam Miller coming in from Penn State, Jet Elad coming in from UNLV. Just a lot of new guys and new faces into this program, but a lot of upside. So maybe the defense can keep it in. So maybe the defense can keep them in this game against Iowa, especially with Iowa losing Caleb Johnson, who was such a pivotal person on this offense last year, but I do think at the end of the day, Iowa just has a little bit more experience and should be able to beat Rutgers here. Rutgers gets their first road trip of the season to face Minnesota, and the Golden Gophers are a team in the Big Ten that we think are going to be pretty successful. They've been hovering around that middle of the pack, slightly above average team in the Big Ten under PJ Fleck, who I believe just got a contract extension. So Minnesota is going to be around for a long time, and they return their starting running back in Darius Taylor, who is coming off of a really, really good season. They have Drake Lindsey stepping up to be their starting quarterback after being the backup in his freshman season last year. But overall, this Minnesota team, I think, is just consistently good year in and year out, especially on the road here for Rutgers. I think they will struggle just a little bit to open Big Ten play and will fall to the Golden Gophers. But maybe this is once again a game that we can see them compete in. But I think at the end of the day, the experience of Minnesota is going to be what ultimately gets them the win here.
And then it just keeps getting tougher. You have a road trip to Washington. We are actually pretty high on this Washington team. I really like Demond Williams. and he's going to have some solid weapons to throw the football to. Just all around, Washington's looking like a really solid team, potential dark horse in the Big Ten. If you watched our playoff dark horses video, you'd see that we actually have them as a potential candidate to make it to the college football playoffs if everything goes well. This is going to be one of Rutgers' toughest games of the season. Washington has a very solid home field advantage. And I think that the Scarlet Knights are going to struggle very heavily in that. So we think Washington's going to be the clear favorites here and should pull out a pretty decisive win. And then going back home to face another West Coast team. This time Oregon's the one who has to make the travel, the long travel. And I think that the Ducks, regardless of how far they have to travel, are way better than Rutgers. This is a really solid Rutgers team, but it just doesn't compare to the amount of talent that Oregon is able to pull in. And Dante Moore in this Dan Lanning system, I think, is going to end up being a pretty solid quarterback. It's obviously always tough to tell when you haven't seen them start a game yet, but he was a solid recruit. Dan Lanning is a quarterback whisperer. This Oregon offense is going to be terrifying to deal with once again, and I just don't see any way that Manis and Rutgers are going to be able to keep up with the amount of points that Oregon can put up.
They should get in the win column in Big Ten play the following week with a road trip to face Purdue, as the Boilermakers are just ridiculously bad. They were one of the worst teams in all of the FBS last season. I don't think they will be much better this year, losing some of their biggest and really only playmakers, including Max Clare at tight end, who is expected to be a top five, if not a top three tight end going into next season. Really, Rutgers, the youth and experience they have in some positions should carry most of the weight here and lead them to a win on the road against Purdue. And then they will have another road trip, this time against Illinois. A lot of hype surrounding the Fighting Illini as Luke Altmaier is back at quarterback after a phenomenal season that ended in a bowl win over South Carolina, a team that was essentially one win away from making the college football playoffs with so much talent on that team. So Illinois has a lot of hype going into this season, and they can live up to that hype if everything goes right. I don't know if they're going to be quite as good as we saw Indiana was last year. I think their schedule doesn't really allow them to go 11-1. They would have to pull off a pretty shocking upset. But I do think overall this Illinois team is pretty good with Altmaier returning. They'll need some people to step up in the wide receiver room after losing a lot of their weapons from last year. But defensively, they'll be very solid. I think Brett Bielema is doing a phenomenal job turning around this program, and Rutgers can give them a fight. Like we said, this Rutgers team has some great players on this team. We haven't even talked about the transfers that they are bringing in on offense. DT Sheffield's coming in from North Texas at the wide receiver position after catching 11 touchdowns last year on 66 receptions. On 66 receptions, 1/6 of his catches were for a touchdown, along with CJ Campbell Jr. as their new starting running back coming in from FAU. This Rutgers team might shock some people and will hang in some of these games against these top teams. But at the end of the day, there's just a little bit too much experience on these top teams like Illinois. So Illinois is going to get the win over Rutgers, but don't be surprised if this is a lot closer than you expect.
And then it does get a little bit easier with Maryland down there near the bottom of the conference with Purdue. Really, we're not high on this Maryland team at all. I think they're going to struggle quite a bit this season. There's not much to look forward to here. They have a true freshman starting quarterback. By this point, he should be a little bit more adequated to college football, but it's still a huge jump, especially going straight into Big Ten play, one of the top conferences in all of college football. This game for Maryland is going to go pretty rough, I think, and it will bring Rutgers to within one game of making a bowl. But when you look at the last two games on the schedule, things are looking pretty bleak. The first one, a road trip to Ohio State, and the Buckeyes are going to be one of the best teams in the country once again this season. The defending national champions lost a lot of their team from last year, but they were able to rotate a ton of guys in who didn't have as much experience So while most of these starters are going to be, starting a game for the first time, they played around a third of the snaps overall last season and have a significant amount of experience. So the Ohio State coaching staff really set up this team, despite losing a ton of seniors, to be prepared for that. I think Ohio State's going to be a really good team once again, and especially at home, they're going to blow Rutgers out of the water.
And if you thought the Ohio State game was bad at the shoe, hosting Penn State is not going to be much better to cap off Rutgers season. Penn State arguably might be the favorite to win the Big Ten going into next year with the amount of production they have returning. Drew Aller back at the quarterback position. Both their starting running backs in Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are returning as well. James Franklin was very active in the transfer portal and loaded this wide receiver room up with tons of weapons. So we might actually see Drew Aller throw to more than one person all season, like he did with Tyler Warren last year. And then defensively, I don't even know where to start. First of all, Jim Knowles coming in as the new defensive coordinator from Ohio State after having one of the best defenses in the country. And Penn State just churns out solid edge rushers, solid defensive linemen year after year after year. We saw it with Micah Parsons. We saw it with Abdul Carter last season. They have new young guys stepping up this year that have got a lot of analysts and a lot of Penn State fans very excited. I would be shocked if Rutgers manages to beat Penn State this year. Maybe early on, Rutgers and the youth and talent that they have are able to kind of hang around with Penn State. But once the second half rolls around, Penn State will be in full control. They'll be looking to put a stamp on their college football playoff resume as one of the best teams in the country. And I do think at the end of the day, the Nittany Lions will get the win, dropping Rutgers to 5-7, making them very unlikely to get into a bowl game, if not for some extenuating circumstances. But overall, this should be a pretty successful season for the Scarlet Knights, despite the record, just because the schedule is so difficult.
Yeah, our way too early projection was 5.75 wins. We had Rutgers going 5-7, and the same prediction is there at 5-7. The projection to 5.6 wins, 2.85 and 6.15 in Big Ten play. Now, I do want to say, I think that Rutgers is a very solid team, and the 5-7 record really doesn't reflect how well we think they're going to play this season. But our top five teams in the Big Ten are Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Illinois, and Washington. That's not necessarily the order, but Rutgers plays all five of them. And when that's on your schedule, it makes it so difficult to make a bowl game because there is no room for error. That being said, though, the ceiling is going to be 6-6. There's a slight chance that they can make it there, but they're going to need to play almost perfect in the games where they have a realistic chance to win. The floor going to be 3-9. This is really just if everything else falls apart, and that is a possibility given how difficult this schedule is. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.